I guess it does make me a little uneasy, Nico said, glancing back at the rock. It's not an ordinary rock, that's for sure. I mean, it's glowing for starters. Hey, don't touch it! Nico's voice rang out louder suddenly as he noticed Hastis had walked up to the stone and was hovering his hand just over its glossy surface. Hastis snapped his hand back instinctively. I'm wearing gloves, he said with a touch of indignation, waving his hand in the air to show them. You don't know if gloves will protect you if that thing is dangerous, Nico scoffed. Hastis scowled. You're probably right. I just suddenly had the urge to touch it and see if anything happened. It was almost like a voice in my head. But it wasn't a voice, you know? Nico shook his head. Not at all. You sound like Daryl. Hastis sighed. Whatever. We're getting distracted anyway. Where's the demon? It must be around here somewhere. He gripped his rifle at the ready again and began to slowly circle around the space stone, sweeping it from side to side in preparation for trouble. After he had circled around the entire stone and paced around the surrounding area, Hastis stopped several yards away from the other boys and shrugged. This beats me, he said. It looks like there might be some tracks leading up to our space rock, but nothing leading away, and nothing else is around. He stared intently at the stone for a moment. I wonder. Maybe the demon is in the stone. Maybe it's some kind of vessel. Daryl, shoot it with your lasgun. No, I'm not doing that, Daryl said emphatically. Hastis shrugged. Well, if you won't, I will. I told you both I'm doing absolutely everything I can to kill this thing. He raised his rifle and took aim. No, don't! Both Nico and Daryl shouted at once. Hastis refused to be swayed, though. You should both probably move back, he said, his finger tightening on the trigger. At that moment, a large, dark shape came flying out of the smoke at him from his left, seemingly materializing out of nowhere. A bright red flash streaked by him from the other side with a distinct cracking sound and struck the shadowy figure, which let loose an unearthly keening that pierced Hastis' ears painfully. This all happened in a fraction of a second. Then the creature was upon him. Hastis swiveled, but didn't have time to bring his rifle to bear. Massive claws attached to some deformed-looking appendage whistled past his head, barely missing decapitating him. If it weren't for the las bolt that had struck the creature, combined with his own lightning-fast reaction time, Hastis would have been killed instantly, without a chance. The demon was about as tall as a grown man, and twice as broad. It was purple, scaly, and heavily muscled, with a mess of limbs, yellow bulbous eyes, and fanged mouth seemingly all over its body, although the thing was vibrating and thrashing around at such an unbelievably fast pace that it was difficult to get a good look. As the creature's torso impacted him, he could definitely feel something that felt like a mouth with gnashing, pointed teeth biting viciously into his sides. They both toppled down, and sensing that he only had moments before the demon's many sharp natural weapons tore him to pieces, Hastis twisted the barrel of his rifle till it was pointing into the demon's gut, and pulled the trigger. The demon recoiled, and Hastis took advantage of the split-second relief of pressure to roll out from under it. He dropped his rifle and drew his large hunting knife from his belt. In a smooth motion, he plunged the blade into the creature's side as deep as it would go. Hastis was guided by a calm, cold fury now. He felt no fear for his own life. In his mind, there was only the memory of the brutalized remains of his mother, father, brother, and sister. But the demon was a formidable foe and wasn't going to go down so easily. A double-jointed talon slashed out at him, and although he tried to dodge the blow, once again he wasn't quite fast enough. A claw slashed deep into his shoulder, while the force from the rest of the limb sent him sprawling, his knife wrenched out of his hand and left still embedded in the demon. As Hastis was not clear, there was the deep, booming report of a black powder rifle and the higher-pitched snap of the las gun firing. Thank the Emperor his friends had kept their wits about them. The demon recoiled with that unearthly keening again. It stung Hastis' ears, but he refused to let it slow him down. He had no weapon now. If he didn't act quickly and the demon kept pressing, which it undoubtedly would considering its killing habits, he'd be done for. Hastis leapt forward and grabbed the handle of his knife. He threw his other arm and leg over what he could only guess was the creature's back, and wrapped his forearm around towards its chest. He could feel teeth gnawing at him, and although the creature still seemed somewhat stunned by the 2 shots it had taken, several of its double-jointed limbs were already starting to curl back to reach him. Hastis wrenched his knife blade free. On top of the demon's torso was a bulbous, swiveling protrusion. although it was no more or less covered with eyes and mouths as the rest of the demon, looked like the closest thing it had to a head. Hastings plunged his blade deep into the base of the demon's head 3 times. Black blood spurted out and ate through his clothing and the demon's own skin like acid where it struck. The demon howled in pain, even more ear-splitting than its earlier cries. The sensation was so intense, Hastings felt like it was going to make him pass out. With the last of his strength, he plunged the blade into the neck area at the base of the demon's head and wrenched it around as far as it would go, grappling the bulbous top with his other arm. The demon's head came clean off, and as it spasmed wildly in its death throes, Hastings went with it. He landed several yards away with an unpleasant crunching sensation, and the demon's head slipped from his grasp, its many mouths still gnashing their teeth, and its eyes looking around wildly. The body was still thrashing around too, although it had fallen over and seemed unable to rise, making it much less of a threat. Daryl fired his lasgun into it again and again, until it lay still. Then he walked over to the gibbering head and put a shot in that too, which ended its moving. Nico was still struggling to reload his black powder rifle after the first shot. He muttered to himself as Daryl hogged what little glory was left over from Hastings, cursing the other boy's luck and his inferior equipment. As he looked up from finishing the task, however, he noticed something. The rock! It's not glowing anymore! Daryl turned and Hastings weakly lifted his head. It was true. The faint yellow glow from deep within was gone, leaving a much more ordinary-looking, glossy black stone. You know, Daryl said softly, I think that really was a demon. The 3 boys observed a moment of awed silence at the thought, before Hastings slumped back over. I'm covered with bruises and cuts, and I think I've broken a few bones, he said. I'm going to lie here for a while, if that's all right with you. Daryl and Nico rushed over to attend him, insisting on looking at his injuries to make sure he wasn't bleeding out or otherwise in immediate danger. After they'd bandaged his arm and done the best they could to rig up a splint for a broken collarbone, they honored Hastings' request to let him rest. As the other 2 boys inspected the demon's remains, they found another oddity, however. It's a grox, Nico said. That was definitely not a grox, Daryl replied. It was purple and scaly like a grox, but it definitely wasn't a grox. I fracking know that, Daryl, Nico said, growing even more agitated than he usually was. But it is now. That's unmistakably a grox. And indeed it was. Although the remains before them were quite badly mutilated by gunshots and knife wounds, both the severed head and body belonged to one of the horse-sized purple lizards that served as livestock throughout much of the Imperium. The extra mouths, eyes, and limbs, and its twisted shape, were gone. This is all too much, Daryl said, rubbing his forehead with both his hands. Nico let loose a stream of profanity. That's great. That's just fracking great. We killed a bloody fracking demon, and now no one will ever believe us. Emperor's teeth. Nico! Daryl slapped the other boy on the shoulder. It could be a lot worse. We could be dead. We probably should be dead. So shut up. Let's get Hastings up. We're going to have to help him up the side of that crater, and it's not going to be a fun process. If we're lucky, we'll get back without getting rained on again. Nico opened his mouth to respond, but for once, Daryl had left him at a complete loss for words. Finally, he managed to grunt and followed the other boy over to where Hastings was lying limply on the ground, to help their friend up and begin the long journey home.